everybody. Peter Eisler here, and a very special guest and close friend of mine, Skip Novak, on board as well. Hey there, Skip.
How you doing, Peter? Yeah.
Skip, you and I, we kind of overlap paths a few times in our lives, and both started in dinghies and small boat sailing routes, and you've gone off in a really, really cool direction for which I'm proud to say I even know you. And both of us got involved with racing for a chunk of our lives, but the opportunity here to catch up with you, commemorating the publication of latest book, Skip Novak on sailing, is pretty special.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, I remember sailing, together in the Beagle Channel, with Gary Jobson and co. doing that ESPN film. All God knows that must be, what was that, 30 years ago or something? Yeah, and we've kept in touch over the years, and we actually, bumped into each other in Antarctica, in my sort of, playground down there years ago when you were on a cruise on the Hansi Explorer, if I got that correct. And we had New Year's Eve together. Is that
That's
right?
right. It was a big party. We ate grapes at the countdown and danced all night long with
Yeah, right.
on the
Yeah,
on the ice floes.
yeah, Port Lockroy. That's it. Yeah,
And then you went back to your tent where you were camping out with your son
that's right. Yeah,
while
yeah,
your
we had a
daughter
camp.
counted penguins.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we were down there for well, the boat was down there 3 months at this one base with a film team documenting the life of a Gen 2 penguin. Filming the whole stages of, hatching out of the egg, well, hauling out first, laying the egg, hatching the egg, rearing the chicks, and then fledging in March. So yeah, it was a big project. And that was the little boat, my first little pelagic that I built in 86, 87. So that boat is now, 37 years old and still going strong. I was up in Greenland with my son and partner and some friends, young people. Last two summers ago, we did 3 months on the west coast of Greenland, from Cape Farval in the south all the way up to 78 north. It was absolutely superb. No charters, just personal trip just for us, and then came down the Baffin coast back to Newfoundland and Maine. It was a great circuit. So that boat's, I got on, I'm always on these bigger boats now, the big Pelagic 77s we're running as a charter operation down south. And of course, they're huge 75-ton vessels and big boats, schooner rigged and the whole thing. And fairly, simple. I try to keep everything simple. That's my philosophy. But of course, when you get that big, it's never that simple. But I get back on my little boat, Pelagic, 54 foot. There's almost nothing to maintain, and it's so great. And you get onto the boat, and after coming from the big boats, you sort of hit your head in places and bark your shins, and it takes a few days to get used to the small boat side of things. But then after that kicks in, it's like, wow, this is the way to go. Small is beautiful. Yeah, in cruising, no doubt about it.
No question. No question. So, Pelagic Expeditions, I recommend, I forward my newsletters all the time to friends because, I mean, the ultimate in expedition level sailing experience, and the programs vary depending on where the boats are and the time of year and what's going on, but you always have some really interesting stuff going on, and between science projects and media stuff. And and you just launched the second 77, which is en route to getting back in the action down the Southern Hemisphere. And I guess we're kicking off, we're really into the heart of the season down there for the other 77. What's been fun going on there the last year or so?
Yeah, well, we got these two boats in play now. The first boat it's on its fourth southern season, and the second boat, which is an absolute sister ship copy of the first boat is Vincent of Antarctica. Second boat is called a Munson, and these are owned by a Chilean colleague, Nicholas Ibanez, and founder of the project. And I'm sort of the mentor manager of the whole shebang with other people based in Barcelona. And so, yeah, we're chartering, we probably say 50% visitors and tourism, wanting to see all these places we go in high north, high south, and also 50% for projects, film streaming services, wildlife films, government surveys, adventure trips, ski mountaineering mainly. cold water diving, do all that type of thing. So we're a vessel of fortune. We'll take anybody's money. We're sort of every trip, I have to say, it's not a routine. It's not like selling tickets on the same old thing. Every trip is a bespoke, custom-made trip for the people who buy into it. Yeah.
Right.
So the last two trips that were really noteworthy, I think, about a year ago, November, December, we did a 5-week trip down to the Zavodovsky Island in the way south of South Georgia. There's a chain of islands down there and volcanic islands, active volcanoes, they're degassing. And this is the second trip we made down there and camped ashore for 8 days and doing penguin surveys, flying drones, counting the 2.5 million chin strap penguins on this island, which is absolutely unbelievable. Tiny island. It's only 4 kilometers long by 3 kilometers wide, with a 500-meter volcanic, 600-meter volcanic cone on the top, and tagging penguins, putting GPS tags on to look at foraging ranges of penguins, because that informs the South Georgia government for the fisheries to set, not only quotas, but also no-take zones for the fishing fleets in the Southern Ocean who buy licenses for inside their maritime zone, their economic zone. So that was really interesting. That was working for British Antarctic Survey, so British government. And then following right on the heels of that thing was another amazing trip, 6 weeks on South Georgia, doing a once in 10 years census of the great Wandering Albatross. These are these huge birds. There's about 1,000 of them in nesting on South Georgia. The last time they were counted in their entirety was in 2015. And this is a sort of a commitment from South Georgia government to an Antarctic Treaty committee to keep track of these birds, because longline fishing has been devastating to all species of albatross over the years. And we counted all these amazing birds in these very obscure locations, mainly on the south coast, which are all restricted areas nowadays. It's a specially protected area, so no tourism operations can land. And, it was a few birds here, 10 here, 20 here, 70 here, on these pretty tough landing places. We managed to do all the known sites. And the good news is the albatross on South Georgia are quite healthy. I mean, they haven't gone down over the last 10 years. They've actually bounced back in quite a few areas. And I think that is, mainly due to all the new longline fishing techniques to stop these birds, going for the bait as they go over the side or coming back up. And so that was a nice trip. And we had a great team, 5 researchers and 5 boat crew, and great trip on. That was on Vincent of Antarctica. So we got some really, great headline projects in amongst the tourism stuff, the bread and butter. And hopefully more, long may it last, because we are one of the, I think, go-to boats. There's only a few of us down there, who have the capability, the size, the cargo carrying capacity, and the expertise to do some of these really oddball projects, quite frankly, out of the mainstream.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of the places you go, there is no backup plan. You're self-sufficient there, and you have to watch out for
Yeah.
your own security, and you're doing rather extreme stuff. Even just, I guess, with your census crew, even just going to all these various spots, put in the anchor, and then throw the dinghy in the water, and then figure out how you're going to climb on shore to do the counting.
Yeah.
Must have some good dinghy techniques we should put in the ASA dinghy manual.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's pretty ballsy stuff, some of the landings, because it's all slippery rocks and a lot of scrambling, and you got huge surf and heave on the south coast especially. It's never dead calm. And it's quite a lot of gymnastics, so I still enjoy it. I can still do it. Yeah.
So putting on my meteorologist hat for a second, how what's the latest for you? How has weather being so important for all the projects you do in terms of planning or even just getting to the location, et cetera? changed recently? What are you doing now to do your morning or your pre-trip planning? And how much has it changed, and what resources are you using or not using? How accurate are the models down there?
Yeah, no, we're using, several models, on the screen on either, windy or predict wind and looking at it several times a day. And, I think, globally you could say, a 3-day forecast is pretty accurate. And 3 days can get us across the Drake Passage. Takes us a bit less on the big boats now. So, compared to the old days when we got caught out crossing the Drake quite often, because we were, in the old days was weather facts, and that was sort of an artist's impression of what they thought it was going to be. And we spent a lot of time heaving to in the Drake, and nowadays there's no excuse for that to be caught out in semi-catastrophic weather where you have to heave to and you can get across the pond on a safe run. Going to South Georgia, being 800 miles there, different story because the 3-day forecast, you start out and looking ahead from day 4 or 5, which usually takes about 5 days to get back from South Georgia upwind. You can never be guaranteed you're going to get in on that forecast. Things change quite quickly, so you may get hammered in the end. So yeah, so there's still a bit of risk there. But yeah, it's changed a lot from the early days where we were mainly flying blind, I'd have to say, in the late 80s, early 90s.
Yeah, but you're relying on just the general weather models that are available, and not trying not to go out too far into the future. I guess there's not much radar, and you got the satellite, I guess you could look at as well.
Yeah, well, we've got satellite, now we got Starlink on board, so you can do most anything. That's a game changer in all sorts of respects. Mainly all good, and there's some downsides to it, from ambience on board. Everybody's on their devices, the whole time, which is sort of a negative. But yeah, I think the big thing in the Southern Ocean, though, looking at historical weather patterns, having done 5 circumnavigations in the old Whitbread days, this dating back to '77. And all the guys say the same thing who have been down there for all these years, is that the weather patterns are definitely changing. The sea conditions are more volatile. It's more like a wash machine than these long Southern Ocean swells we used to ride. And I think a lot of it is due to, northern air intruding and breaking through the circumpolar circulation and causing this mix-up of very volatile conditions. It's sort of, conditions you get more in the North Atlantic when you got, cold air and warm air mixing with cold sea, and so that has changed a lot. So it's a lot less predictable and a lot more, having you have to bash upwind back from South Georgia can be quite uncomfortable sea condition wise. And we had, we chartered, I think, was it 4 times now to the University of Maine Climate Change Institute, Professor Paul Mayuski, very senior guy, taking ice cores down in South Georgia and that type of thing. And one of their specialties is looking at this warm air intrusion into the circumpolar through the circumpolar circulation. And, they take these ice cores and they can actually see, things like volcanic ash, pollution, things like, microscopic pieces of uranium from a certain uranium mine in Australia. I mean, they can actually see that down in the Antarctic, that, that level of detail over ice coring. So, they've got a project called West Wind, which is all about that type of phenomena, what's happening to the Antarctic in terms of all these pollutants coming down by air. Yeah.
All right. Well, you're up north, and the boats are carrying passengers and having fun down there all winter long, or all winter long. So I know you've got a great team of people, and I encourage anybody interested to have a look at the Pelagic Expeditions website and get on the mailing list, because there are some just once in a lifetime opportunities that you can't get anywhere else. And the experience of Skip and his team there is super valuable. Okay, I want to pivot, Skip, and talk about the reason why we're here, which is to have a look at and chat about your latest book, Skip Novak on Sailing, Words of Wisdom from 50 Years Afloat. That's That's optimistic.
Well, it's
The
actually more than 50, but yeah.
and this is I love the format. They are you wrote columns for, well, I think over 10 years for Yachting World magazine, which is published in a number of different languages, but a big British sailing publication that's globally distributed. And the Skip Novak column was always a highlight when you opened up your latest version of Yachting World, and you retired from that a few years ago, and they got all compiled, and you did added some comments to it when it got all re-edited and packaged up.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought it was a nice idea. Number one, the book was already written, basically, and I felt it was a nice idea to put it all under one cover because a lot of people have read, some of these columns or a few, but very few people have had an opportunity to read them all. So it was a nice concept, nice closing the loop idea on it, and having a record. And it's one of these, as I say in the introduction, it's a book you don't want to read cover to cover because it's all these columns are sort of collated into various topics. So you dip into things like safety at sea, or dip into learning how to sail, or yacht design, or back in the day stories and all that type of thing. There's 7 chapters. And so it's a book you want to have, next to your, what we call in Britain, next to the loo, when you're doing your ablutions, or have it on your coffee table or up in your pilot house on the yacht when you're on watch, and put your feet up and read a few chapters or a few articles. So that's sort of the concept, yeah. And I had Robin Knox Johnson do the introduction, Sir Robin Knox Johnson, and famous people like Peter Eisler and Gary Jobson have, put their scribblings on the back saying what a great read it is. So, yeah, it was fun. It was fun to do, actually. Yeah.
All right. Well, I meant it when I said you're the Obi-Wan Kenobi of the sailing world,
Right.
or whatever I put on the back cover. But you've always been a great writer, and I know it's hard to put something into that short little column length, which was the format there in the Yachting World um, column. Sometimes you do big feature stories for various publications, and I love your writing and your perspective on it just as much as I love hearing you talk about these things. As you say, the chapters: learning to sail, ocean racing, design and maintenance, technology, pros and cons, safety at sea, expedition sailing, and stories from the back in the day, which is a great little section. It, you really can just open it anywhere, and that's the whole idea. It's
Yeah.
something you grab a subject or not. I picked out a couple of a few different chapters that are sort of my favorites, just almost because the title captured the imagination. And thinking about our ASA community, and a lot of people here are have come in and learned to sail keelboats through an ASA school and recreational sailing. Not as many into racing, although some may be like we sort of gathered us, you and I, into the sport. But there's a lot of ways to get into sailing. But one of the topics that I thought was sparked the imagination would be interesting is fixing things the right way. How do you fix things the right way? Or what are you talking about in that chapter?
Well, that's all, it's all about, you're talking about, maintenance issues and that type of thing. And there's several articles about that, about, looking at, understanding your boat very well. Number one, doing sea trials, and trying to do proper sea trials if you just bought a boat, or, refitted a boat. And that's one of those things that always gets put in the background, and you never quite pull it off because you're under pressure to do the first regatta, or you're off on the first cruise. And I keep promoting this idea. I'm not very successful at it myself because I can have quite a few examples. I could tell you about how we left to go on around the world race with absolutely no sea trials. But I encourage everybody, how to go about concentrating on the priorities of, getting the boat, taking it out, thrashing it upwind, because it's very hard, psychologically to go out if you don't have to go upwind, get water over the deck. It's the only way you're going to check for leaks. You're not going to do it with a hose at the dock. I mean, forget that. And really work the boat, because the boat moves things change. Machinery in the engine room, it's fine at the dock, but once you go offshore, things start to leak. Fuel systems, water systems, etc. So yeah, it's like more in-depth thinking about what's required. Yeah.
Right, right. Yeah, it's the list, putting the list together, and the best lists get created by open-eyed people that have put the boat through its paces and real conditions, not just like you
Yeah.
say, sitting at the dock and looking at a bright, shiny new boat or something that's just come out of the yard. How about this was a fun one too for me. Your thoughts on a galley you can cook in?
Yeah. Well, when I go down on most of these yachts, whether they be production yachts or custom one-offs, I immediately look at the galley and say, well, what's this is great sitting at the dock. It looks like something in a designer-led home. And how do you cook at sea at this thing? Because there's no fiddles on the countertops, or if there are fiddles, they're never high enough to hold a cup that stop falling over. And how is it all laid out? Are the sinks on center line so they drain properly? Which direction is the stove facing? If you have a boat big enough, the stove should be facing fore or aft, not athwartships, and that's for safety reasons as much as anything. And the whole design of being able to pin yourself in there and still cook decent meals when you're in gale conditions. And we were designed on the 77s, absolutely fantastic galleys. Big high fiddles, 75 millimeters. That's about 3 inch tall. Tiny stove, just two burners, custom made to fit two 12-liter pressure cookers from Lagostini in Italy. Sinks big enough to fit the pressure cookers in the sink so you could wash the pressure cooker. All this type of stuff, when you look at the normal galley, the sinks are never deep enough. They're never big enough to wash a pot out. Fiddles aren't high enough. There's no support, thigh support to lean against a good countertop to be able to do things in the galley. So there's a whole bunch of detail in that. And boats are designed mainly, for boat shows, and that's how they sell them. It's all understandable. People go on board and they say, "Oh, this is magnificent," and they're imagining themselves at an anchorage cooking. It's great, but as soon as you go offshore, the whole thing changes, and you're into cup of soups, you know, and dried biscuits. So
Yeah, if you can even boil water.
if you can boil water, even, yeah, right. So yeah, that's a focus. And the other one, I dwell on in that, I think in that same chapter is the safety at sea of being down below. And it is a fact that most injuries on yachts happen down below, of people getting tossed around, hitting their head, cracked ribs or worse, broken thighs in the worst case, falling through enormous spaces. I mean, well, if you look at the super yachts, it's like being in a mansion, and the spaces are enormous, with very few mitigating measures to make it safe at sea, and that are at least aesthetically pleasing for these people, to not make it look like a complete gymnasium. So that's a point of fact, is that how do you go to sea and still be able to live on board and travel around the spaces, and if you get a big wave and you're thrown across, where are you going to fetch up? So we put a lot of thought into, more handholds than you could ever imagine. Where most yachts, they tend not to have too many, and they're
Yeah,
never big enough or long enough or strong enough. So we have handholds everywhere, and we have a lot of mitigating measures that we can erect. Take things you break down and put it away, structures, goes up in the forepeak somewhere in a rack. And then when we go to sea, we erect them in the pilot house, which is a big space, and also things in the main saloon, which is a big space, to actually have people to either catch them or be able to grab onto things. And that's something you don't find a lot on most yachts, is thought put into that. It's again, it's at the dock in a marina, and it all looks fantastic. And then when you go to sea, it's whoa, gee. Yeah. And sharp corners, another one, designer-led interiors with sharp corners. I mean, this is nuts.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
You'll find them all when you go offshore.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I love that. A lot of people design their houses or their bedroom or living room around their pets. Here, you can design your galley around your cookware. I love
Yeah, yeah. Start with the cookware.
it.
Get those really good pots and pans, and figure out how are you going to put all that together. Not go the other way. Yeah.
Here was a fun chapter that is timely for us because ASA is just branched out and we've gotten into power boating and putting together an educational system with the NASBLA and the state licensing movement that's coming as to make boating more safety, especially power boating. So we've got the American Boating Association sister organization and putting together facilities around the country and around the world that will teach a learn to powerboat program akin to the to the sailing program. But this chapter was called "The Age-Old Question: Sail or Power," and a lot of our peers I've noticed have been moving over to power lately from their sailboat yachts, as they're called in some parts of the world. Got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I actually bumped into a great friend of mine, Paul Stanbridge. He's, one of the most consummate yachtsmen going, and he's still racing. And he's done, yeah, same like me, 4 or 5 Whitbreads and all the rest of it. And he's just bought himself an ex-RNLI, Royal National Lifeboat Institute, fiberglass powerboat, just to tool around on the south coast of England. No sails, he says. And so he's sort of gone to the dark side. And yeah, quite a few of our peers, as you say, have done so as well. Yeah, I see the point, for inshore cruising and that type of thing. Wouldn't go that way for transoceanic by any means. The sailboat is still so much more comfortable. And there's things to do. I mean, let's face it, going across the ocean on a motorboat can be pretty boring. Whereas sailing, you still have to do stuff, and I'm still into doing stuff. I'm still into the physicality of it. I'm not a button pusher by any means.
Yeah.
So yeah, that is the way to go. And I'm not there yet. I mean, I'm 72, and I still love to sail. And I just love to, wind winches and set sails and reef and in all weathers. And then, the day I don't want to go forward to reef that sail is probably the day I'm going to quit sailing. I mean, yeah, you got to want to do it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which takes us to an important chapter and one that you've always been a proponent on. And I know you've been asked to speak on the subject: seamanship, safety at sea. There's a chapter on life jackets. There's a chapter on seamanship below decks. What's the safety briefing like before you go on a passage across on the 77 from Port Williams over to South Georgia, or a long passage like that?
Yeah, we're actually just interesting topic because we're actually going through on these 2 boats, and we've got now 4 teams of 3 crews that we're going to shift between all the boats, 4 months on, 4 months off. So we're standardizing things like the safety briefing, and we got it down to about 40 minutes of the safety briefing, the on deck part. What happens before that, when people arrive to these boats, we do the household briefing. They've just flown in, they move on board, stowing their gear. The first thing that happens is household briefing: how to use the toilets, the heads, the galley, turning, how to light the stove, gas valve shut off, etc. The whole protocols of that, moving around the boat, where the fire extinguishers are, where the bilge pumps are, and the operation of such, that type of thing. So they're off, they have that, it's a lot to take in for people, especially non-sailors, because we do take non-sailors to these places. So the household briefings first, and that's run by, 2 people with a crew member, not too many, because you got to go through all the spaces and all things about the lee cloths in the cabins and the ventilation and the hatches and, all that stuff. Then we have the deck briefing, the important one about, go through life jackets, survival suits, man overboard gear, life raft, abandoned ship procedures, where all this stuff is, EPIRBs, and all that, and life jacket use, what's in a life jacket, how to clip on, how to move up and down the deck when the boat's heeling, port or starboard, and that type of thing. So yeah, we do the whole thing in about 40 minutes, very concise. Some of the skippers were doing it a bit too elaborately, was running for an hour and a half, and it was too much material to take in. So you got to be pretty pretty short and sharp about it and clear. And then, of course, during the voyage, the safety briefing continues through the life of the expedition. And that's up to
Yeah.
the crew to keep watching people, reminding them about this, reminding them about that.
One more before a little fun way to wrap this up, and that is the chapter on expedition sail. The chapter on stories from back in the day. That's a must read, but I'm going to leave that for another set of
Yeah,
stories and maybe a little
that's
bit
some
of
good
rum
stuff in
at the
there.
same
Yeah,
time.
yeah.
But the expedition sailing, that's been your gig for a number of years now, and you're the modern day Magellan, some people have called you, but one of the places you keep going back to and you talk about, you mentioned it already, is South Georgia Island, and the Shackleton adventure is at the forefront in a lot of people and in the media. There's been lots of movies, and there was recently a celebration of the anniversary of that. But that whole rescue story still sparks imaginations, and I know you've recreated the climb over the top from the south side of the island and did down in many times.
Yeah.
Give me your thought. What's South Georgia like, and what does it mean to you? It's like
Mm.
me going back to, I don't know, Chicago Yacht Club for the Mac race. It's just on
Yeah.
the calendar. You do the
Right.
same thing, but it's
Yeah.
South Georgia Island.
Yeah. Well, I mean, South Georgia is my, bar none, my favorite venue, high north or high south. It's got everything I love. It's a real sail to get there. Good bash, downwind sail and a bash to get back. So, and once you're on the island, the salient point is there's no airstrip on that island. So there's no way to get out of there other than sail yourself back. And that sort of impacts things like how careful you operate down there, because if you do have an accident, you really are in a pickle, in terms of medivacs and things. There is no formal medivac system in place. But it is remote, it's wild, and that's one of my prime interests of going down to the south in the first place was going to remote areas to go mountaineering. And South Georgia is a glaciated spine, two major mountain ranges, full of unclimbed peaks still. We've climbed about, I think, six unclimbed peaks over the years. We actually have a mountain named Mount Pelagic. You can actually submit names to the place name committee and get them named. We've named, I think, four mountains on the island. So where else are you going to do this type of thing? I mean, it's pretty rare, and coupled with the mountaineering and the skiing we do, usually late winter, early spring, September time. You've got the wildlife, which is, South Georgia sits right on the top of the polar front, where you have all the mixing of the polar water and the subantarctic water, and then the proliferation of wildlife is unbelievable. Millions of penguins, millions of seals, flying birds, albatross nesting, whales offshore. The whales are coming back now after the whaling era. And it's the wildlife's in your face and it chases you around. I mean, you don't have to look far at all. There's wildlife everywhere, and it's incredible. And then, in addition to that, you've got the tangible history in South Georgia. One thing is the Shackleton route, of course. And that whole story of Shackleton sailing from Elephant Island and then landing and then going across the mountain range. I've done that six times now. Marvelous trip. Never get tired of it to actually see that route he did. He did it in 36 hours. We take about 4 or 5 days, take our time and really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Tented camps on the way. We usually camp about 4 or 5 tented camp nights. And then you have the whaling history, the tangible whaling history. There's all these abandoned whaling stations. One big one's turned into a museum now in Grytvik and Cumberland Bay. And yeah, all that stuff, you still see a lot of this stuff on the beach, the tripods from the sealing area and various bits of machinery. And there's 5 big whaling stations, 4 of which are off limits because of the risk of asbestos and flying sheet metal as they collapse into themselves. But one station they have preserved, stripped off the buildings and all the machinery is there, and it's like a museum now that you can actually walk through. So you have, for South Georgia, for, bang for the buck, go down there. You got to go down for at least 28 days. That's the minimum we do. 35 days better. Because once you get down there, everybody says, gee, I wish we had an extra week, because you never get enough of it, no matter what you're doing. If you're just a visitor or if you're skiing or you're climbing or whatever, the scientists, the same story. They never want to leave. And it is a magical place and it's nothing like it. And we tend to go down early in the season. The Albatross survey we did was high summer, but we tend to go down late August, September for the ski mountaineering, because you got snow right down to the beach. So where else are you going to be able to ski down? Well, ski up or down through and around the penguin colonies and, into the fur seals and right to the dinghy. So this is, yeah, it's pretty special.
Yeah, a must go. I gotta go.
Yeah, you got to go. I mean, you sign up.
I gotta go.
Yeah.
All right. Well, to wrap this up, I thought it'd be fun to throw you a little curveball, which you are not expecting, and that is pretend that your audience, the person that you're talking to in your camera, is somebody that an adult who or a kid who's just getting into sailing, just getting into the sport. What message, advice slash message do you have for them?
The first message for anybody getting into sailing is start on a tippy dinghy that can capsize at a blink of an eye. And if you can master that, you can transfer those skills, as you can transfer those skills right up to any size of vessel. It's all the same thing. It gets less sensible the bigger boats you're on, but it's the same phenomena. When they heel over, usually dump the traveler, ease the main sheet, move over to the windward side. All this type of thing, steer up to take the load off, power down. And you learn this on a laser. The Optimist isn't my cup of tea. That's another story, obviously, but I don't think it's the greatest boat to learn to sail on, and I think it's probably put more people off than on sailing as a life sport. But things like lasers, things like, well, the Open Bic as a great starter boat, fun dinghy, self-bailing cockpit, capsizes, you pop it back up and go again. So for any age, and I run into people all the time in their 30s and 40s who want to learn how to sail. And I says, yes, you can take courses on these, 30-foot, 40-foot cruising boats with the RYA and UK and all these programs. There's, they're everywhere. But also do some dinghy sailing. That's the thing. And I think once you have that grounding, you transfer it up and you feel confident on any size of boat right up to a super yacht. So yeah, that's the first point. And I think the other one, and this also goes to the racing, genre is, I think it's getting better nowadays. But, when we started out, it was all about racing. That was it when you were sailing. It was going around triangles, windward lewards. And I think, what was lost maybe back then was using even dinghies to make a voyage, with the kids and sail somewhere, sail down to the beach and have a picnic and sail back and around an island or whatever. And those sort of programs that engender that sense of, yes, we can use a boat to go somewhere, to voyage. And then, of course, the voyages get longer the older you get and the more expertise you have. And the next thing you know, you're sailing around the world. So I think that's very important. When I was a kid in Chicago, we did plenty of course races, and on the cruiser racers and all that. But the biggest excitement when you were 13 was sailing 30 miles to Michigan City, Indiana, that type of thing. And then, of course, up to Mackinac Island, that was the holy grail, 330 miles, I mean, for a kid. And arriving in a place like Mackinac Island, which was a very particular, almost like a foreign country, which was great. And I think that set the scene for me as a lifelong activity to use boats as a mode of travel. Yeah, stood me in good stead. Yeah.
You don't have to just go around triangles. You can actually get somewhere and
Yeah, right. And have a
take
good
your
time.
time and have fun doing it.
Yeah, yeah. I
All
mean,
right, so
you do have, I have to point out, you do have to, if you really want to be a good sailor, you do need that racing discipline for the fine points and the nuances. You don't get that anywhere unless you race. So
yeah,
you have to
yeah,
combine
that's,
the two.
I mean, you think about it, just looking out at the bay or in the summertime where you are in England and watching the boat sailing, you can tell the people that are sorted out and whether they're cruising, recreational sailing, or racing, you can tell the
Yeah,
teams that do have the knowledge, the all the battens are in, the leeches
Yeah,
aren't flapping, the fenders aren't dragging over the side, the crew's on the proper
yeah,
side. You don't have to
yeah,
be winning the race, but there is something that's the art of good seamanship is
yeah,
taught in spades there on the performance side of things. Hey, Skip, thank you. That was it was a
yeah.
fun catch up, and on this propitious solstice day, I can't
Yeah.
think of a better way to do it. I'm looking forward to continuing my adventures through Skip Novak on Sailing, the book that just came out on Get It anywhere you get your books. And as I mentioned earlier, sign up for the newsletter and get on the mailing list for Pelagic Expeditions and follow the adventures. I mean, even if you don't have time to go on a 28-day plus trip to the
Yeah.
South Georgia Islands. I
Yeah.
mean, Rick Tomlinson, the famous photographer, was just down on the boat and took some amazing pictures. You can live vicariously through some of the most beautiful parts of the world that you can only get to by sailboat.
Yeah. That's the point. Peter, all the best. And yeah, we got to sail together again, you know. Yeah. Come down. Sign up.
Let's do it. Let's do it. All right, Skip. Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye.
Okay. Bye. Bye-bye.